Members of Council, if you can please take your seats. Members of Council, I will call this meeting to order. Would you please stand for the national anthem?
Ton bras s'est porté l'épée, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Please remain standing for a moment of silence and personal reflection. Thank you. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. For the benefit of those who are connected to the internet, the City Clerk has posted all of the agenda materials for today's meeting at www.toronto.ca/council. This special meeting of Council was called for the following purposes: to discuss the Ontario government's reintroduction of a bill to reduce the size of Toronto City Council and use of Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to exempt this bill from judicial review. To introduce and enact a confirming bylaw for this special meeting. Members of Council, as this is a special meeting under Council's procedures, no new business items such as notices of motions may be introduced. This rule cannot be waived. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Mihevc?
No interest.
Councillor Torcy?
No interest. Sorry.
Okay, can we just take your names off then, please? Thank you. Are there any petitions at this time? Okay, we will now review and confirm the order paper. Once the order paper has been approved by Council, any change will need a 2/3 vote. We have one item before us. The City Solicitor has submitted a supplementary report on this item, which has been placed on members' desks. Council will recess between 12:30 and 2 p.m. and from 6 to 6:30. We are scheduled to meet until 8 p.m. tonight. Council will reconvene tomorrow at 9:30 if necessary. All those in favor of adopting the order paper, recorded vote.
Councillor Mihevc. The order paper is adopted. The vote is 28 to 2.
Okay. Mayor Tory?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning. I wanted to take a moment, as I did the last time we had one of these special meetings, to explain, especially to the public and those watching at home or at work, the nature and purpose of this meeting. I have today convened a special meeting of City Council to discuss the reintroduction of a provincial bill to reduce the size of Toronto City Council, which includes the province's plan to use Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to exempt this bill from judicial review. I want to begin by thanking the councillors and the members of the public for taking time to attend or to watch today's meeting so that we can have what I hope will be a thoughtful discussion on this latest development and hear from our city solicitor on what, if any, options that we have as a council. We sent a clear message last month that the process by which this monumental change to the composition of our city council was made was wrong and unacceptable. We then sought a remedy on behalf of our city in the courts, which are an indispensable part of our overall democratic system, standing as they do as the guardians of overreaches which can take place even with democratically elected governments. The City of Toronto, together with other applicants, were successful together in convincing the court to find Bill 5 contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now we're confronted with a new reality that the province is preparing to invoke the notwithstanding clause to push through this legislative change right now. Not only is this unprecedented in the history of Ontario and an unacceptable process, but more importantly, I believe that this overriding of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms raises very big questions on a matter such as this one, and even bigger questions with regard to profoundly important matters that we may not even know about today that will come up in the future. And as such, I think this is an entirely proper and necessary meeting for us to hold now. The importance of this moment is reflected in the comments of a wide variety of people, including former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, former Premier Bob Rae, and former Premier Bill Davis, who himself helped to bring about the much-valued Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we are here today discussing. I want to enter Premier Davis's words into the record at the outset of this meeting, given that he was at the first meeting of this Council at the beginning of this term, and it may be an appropriate and balanced way to put something on the record on what is likely to be the last meeting of this term. He told TVO host Steve Paikin this week that and I quote, "The notwithstanding provision has understandably rarely been used because of the primacy of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for all Canadians." He went on to say, Premier Davis did, that it might now be used regularly to assert the dominance of any government or elected politician over the rule of law or the legitimate jurisdiction of our courts of law was never anticipated or agreed to. Wise words that I hope will guide us in this debate that we're going to have today. So everyone in the public is aware we will shortly, in all likelihood, vote to go into camera to discuss the confidential legal advice of the city solicitor related to this bill. And I trust the members of the public and those watching us online will understand that legal advice is discussed confidentially because it often includes an analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of the city's own legal position. Before we go into camera, I do want to publicly thank our solicitor and her team, our city clerk and those who are trying to prepare for the October 22nd election, our staff and elected officials, and all those who put their names forward as candidates, because it's been a very uncertain period of time, to say the least, and a lot of people have worked very hard, especially people who work here in this building and for the city. Once we've discussed this legal advice the city solicitor has provided to us, we will come back to public session to decide on motions that will direct our city's response to this new legislation. Finally, I will just say, Madam Speaker, that I know we're all here today to keep standing up for Toronto, and I know we're all prepared to continue to do that because we believe in this city. And even more importantly than that, we believe in the almost 3 million people who live here, and we believe in our ability to chart a responsible course for the city that we all serve. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to go in camera? Okay, Councillor de Bearmaker. Oh, I'm sorry.
That Council recess its public session to meet as Committee of the Whole in closed session to consider CC 47.1, discussion of the reintroduction of a bill to reduce the size of Toronto City Council and the use of Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to exempt this bill from judicial review. Reason for confidential information, litigation or potential litigation that affects the City of Toronto, and advice or communications that are subject to solicitor-client privilege.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so if I can ask the public and the media if they could please vacate the council chambers.
Questions of staff.
Your name on the screen yet until we're ready to? We're resetting everything. Thank you. This meeting is now resumed. City Council has completed its closed session consideration of item CC 47.1, headed discussion of the reintroduction of a bill to reduce the size of Toronto City Council and the use of Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to exempt this bill from judicial review. No motions were placed in the closed session. We will now proceed to the public debate on the matter. If we have any public questions, if you can put your name up, request to question staff. Councillor Davis.
I wonder if you could clarify the relation to the city solicitor. If you could clarify for us and for the public the relationship between the stay, the application from the provincial government to stay the decision of Judge Belababa, and the introduction of Bill 31.
The provincial government has appealed Justice Belababa's decision on Bill 5. Bill 5 and Bill 31 are very similar. They both would reduce the size of council to 25. So just to be clear, in the context of an appeal, the prior ruling remains in force unless there's a stay. What the stay does is it effectively puts the ruling under appeal on hold until the appeal has worked its way through the courts. So that's what the stay application is about. Bill 31 is a separate piece of legislation which has not yet been enacted but looks very much like Bill 5 with the addition of a notwithstanding clause to address the charter breach that Justice Belababa found.
So the stay is being heard next week.
On Tuesday, yes.
So if the stay is granted prior to Bill 31 being approved, then how does that affect the current 200 people who were wanting to be or were registering for the previous 47 model election?
If a stay is granted, it will be as though the decision hadn't been made yet, and we will be back to the Bill 5 regime.
So the nomination date will pass on Friday, September 14th. So does that mean candidates would, well, the difficulty is if that decision is after the September 14th date, what will happen to those people who are seeking re-election and haven't registered yet?
There will have been a loss of 5 days of the nomination period, and that is something that the province has attempted to address through Bill 31.
But Bill 5 is in effect if the stay is actually approved, is it not?
That's correct.
So how would the rights of those candidates who lost days to register, how will they be dealt with?
Well, that is certainly a problem that arises from the way this is playing out, Madam Speaker.
Okay. I did want to ask as well, there has been commentary about whether or not there are other options to pursue in relation to Bill 31. Could you, I guess you can't explain your advice, but there are processes that can unfold. For instance, the parties can challenge the legality of Bill 31. Is that correct? Maybe you can just explain that so people understand that.
So, Madam Speaker, yes, that avenue is open to individuals and potentially parties from the Bill 5 proceedings.
And that includes the question of the use of the notwithstanding clause and the method by which that was introduced and its application retroactively to a previous bill. Is that true, that those would be options that could be available to the parties?
Well, Madam Speaker, there's very little case law regarding the notwithstanding clause, but certainly the legality of any piece of legislation can be challenged through an application to the courts.
And are we going to have access to ask questions of the clerk, Speaker? Speaker, if you could put my time on hold. Speaker, are we going to have access?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Councillor Davis. I didn't hear you. Sorry.
I wanted to ask the clerk questions. Is she going to be
Well,
available?
can I ask the clerk to come in the council chambers, please?
And unfortunately, she hasn't heard.
Can I ask the clerk to come in? We're asking questions.
And I hope you would grant me some leniency in terms of my time. The clerk was not in here.
No, and you're absolutely correct. I thought the clerk was coming in the council chambers.
I asked
So
a
I'll give you an extra minute, okay?
Thank you. I asked a series of questions, Ms. Watkins, about a scenario whereby a stay might be granted by the courts prior to Bill 31 achieving, if it does, a royal assent. And in that case, we would revert, I understand from the city solicitor, back to a 25-ward model, and the date for registration of September 14th. Will you allow those applicants or candidates who've not yet registered, who were waiting for a decision, will you allow them to register this week?
That is, I believe, a legal question. Once the stay comes into effect, you are correct, Councillor, that we are back in a 25-ward model. However, I don't know what is permissible if the date in the regulation under the bill talks about September the 14th or whatever it was. That's simply not possible for me to change. So legal will have to give advice on that. I can't.
Okay, and one of the questions I have had is, at what point what authority do you have to determine whether or not an election, a successful election can be held?
Okay,
and
that was your
administered?
last question.
I am frankly at that point, Councillor. Every hour that goes by, every day that goes by creates greater uncertainty and raises in me a huge concern over the proper conduct of this election. I have to let council know that.
Can you make a declaration that you cannot administer?
Councillor Davis, that was your last question.
I am not yet at that point, but I will also tell council that I have retained independent counsel. And I will be discussing various remedies with that lawyer.
Councillor Davis, that was your last question. I did. I gave you over a minute, and I didn't start your time to 30 seconds. Councillor Troisi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is also to the clerk. I know many councillors are frustrated with this process and that they feel like the government of Ontario wants to run things here. What would happen if, in response, all members of council, including the mayor, resign in protest? Who would be in charge?
That's a legal question.
Legal?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. I'd just like to know what would happen if all city council, including the mayor, would resign in protest.
The province would have to step in some way. The municipality is a creature of the province.
Okay, so if there was an example of an emergency, like the one that happened at 650 Parliament, what protocols would then be followed? guess that's a legal question as well.
We would have to, in that instance, obviously we haven't looked at this, we would have to, in that instance, look at our emergency bylaw and look at who was available to step in. But the bylaws are still the bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mihevc.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question for the clerk and a question for the solicitor. The issue of advance voting, first to the clerk. The issue of advance voting, many of us have folks who basically leave or will not be available on October 22nd, and they are starting to be concerned about their ability to vote. Recognizing that you are in a pickle and you deserve all the credit, support, therapy that you need to weather this particular time. Can you just give us some indication of how you hope to manage that?
The Bill 31 has provided, is now containing a provision, if it's passed, that would give to the clerk the discretion not to hold an advance vote. I believe that that would result in an election that is not fair, that does not meet the principles of the Act, that does not meet any integrity of process, because, I mean, campaign workers are workers. All sorts of people have all kinds of circumstances in which they would need to be available on a day other than October 22nd because they simply couldn't attend the election on October 22nd. So I believe that I must provide an opportunity for advance vote.
Okay, so the date and all of that is subject to, between now and then, things somewhat settling down, but that is your best attempt will be to have advance.
I will do my utmost, as will my staff, to ensure that there is an opportunity for an advance vote in some capacity prior to October 22nd, because I believe that the principles of the legislation would not be met otherwise.
Thank you very much for that answer. To the solicitor, in general terms, without speaking to the purple paper, there is a federal authority called the power of disallowance. Can you speak to that in a general way, and what the not us as City Council, but the federal government, if it chose to exercise that, what it would look like?
There is a federal power of disallowance that allows the federal government to effectively trump an exercise of provincial power to enact legislation. It has rarely been used, so we don't have a lot of examples to look at. The last time it was used was in the 40s, but it still exists. It's still on the books. The exercise of that power is, of course, entirely out of our control. And
that power, you called it an interesting word, a trump. So the province basically trumped a judicial process, and the federal government actually can trump the trump, can actually go even beyond that and trump a provincial power. They have full authority to do that. There is nothing that, there is no, that actually is the final recourse. Would that be fair to say? When the federal government feels that inappropriate and undue, an inappropriate decision was made in using a notwithstanding clause or a severe challenge to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was undertaken by any provincial government, that they really have that power to step in and set it right when they feel the national interest is at stake.
They do have that power. It can only be exercised once the legislation has been enacted, though.
I see.
And they do have a couple of years to do it. And as I said, the timing is entirely outside of our control.
Are there any benchmarks that have to be met for the federal government, in your understanding, for the federal government to make that call?
We're not aware of any criteria for the use of that power. I do want to reiterate, though, that it hasn't been used since the 40s, so there's very few examples of it that are relevant currently.
And it's also fair to say that the notwithstanding clause or an equivalent has ever been used in municipal, provincial jurisdictions.
The notwithstanding clause has never been used in Ontario. I can tell you that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions through you are mostly to the clerk. My notes indicate that voters' lists will be available to all candidates on September 17th. Is that correct?
Under the 47 ward model, that is correct.
And these lists are ready to be distributed, and they're available in hard copy and electronic format?
Yes, they are.
So come the 17th of September, your office will be distributing those lists, even though this thing is still creeping through the court system.
Yes, that is the uncertainty and the difficulty that I've been talking about.
So should the courts, should we hit a legal roadblock, and then at the end of the day, we have an election with 25 wards, would you then produce a second set of voters lists?
That's also correct, Councillor.
So my notes also indicate that the voter cards are supposed to go out, I don't know, the same day, September 17th?
That's correct.
And have those voter cards been printed and are in
Yes, they
storage
have.
and ready to go out?
Yes, they are.
And are those based on a 47 ward election or on a 25 seat election?
Both.
So that's a universal voter card. That can.
No, that is actually two sets of voter cards.
Sorry.
I'm breathing.
The card will give two options.
We have two sets of cards.
Yes, Councillor,
so
your
there's-
point that I'm going to talk about is the uncertainty that this creates for this election.
All right. So the cards will go out on the 17th, and it'll be up to individual electors to cipher the.
Well, it's becoming very difficult
Yeah. No.
to expect that voters and candidates can operate under these scenarios.
So polling stations would change fairly dramatically if we keep going back and forth. People don't know where they're supposed to go, and is that de facto voter suppression, or through circumstance, not through anyone's?
Actually, they wouldn't have to change that much because we've done magic with geography and computers.
Okay. Now, the advance polls have already, they were covered already in questions, but the advance poll period has already shrunk.
Yes, I've had to reduce the advance vote period. That's correct.
So in your opinion, based on your earlier comments, that the elimination of advance polls is actually could be circumventing voters' rights, the shrinking of them could also, based on the same logic, could also be the circumventing of
Madam Speaker, yes, I've already indicated my concern with the lack of advance votes of any sort, and I have equal problems with reducing them any further, given my experience with elections and the number of voters we have in Toronto.
Yeah, no, I certainly do not envy your position in this mess. Final question, spending limits. We were given an initial spending limit based on 47 awards, and we're given another spending limit based on 25 awards. Is another letter going out based on 47 awards, or are we going to get a final spending limit, or what? Is that another?
That is what
mess?
we are working through now. Yes, if we continue with the 47 model, then we will absolutely send out those limits.
Because there's an interim limit, and then there's a final limit.
Yes, and it is totally confusing, Councillor, and Madam Speaker, I would agree.
Okay, thank you very much. And once again, I commend you. I don't envy your situation here.
Thank you. Councillor Shan?
Speaker. A lot of my questions got asked by Councillor Pasternak, but taking from there to another set of things. So on Tuesday, if there was a stay granted, what would the scenario be? Because we are hearing that the new legislation may not be passed until end of September or October 1st as dates. So if stay is granted on Tuesday, does that mean the clerk would certify the candidates who had already been nominated on Wednesday or Thursday? How does the time,
question.
if the stay is granted, we going back to 25,
Yep.
which would mean, what would it be on Wednesday? What would happen on Wednesday? Would that be certification of all the candidates who already had registered?
My staff, Councillor and Madam Speaker, are working through contingency plans yet again as we speak. So I will have to see what they come up with for that scenario.
Because there's another date that is important too, as the September 27 date for signs, for election signs. Have you had situations in which before nominations open for a new set, so in case we were going with 47 model and the candidates have put their signs out on 27 based on that model, what would happen October 1st when this changes?
I continue to return to the principles of the legislation, which require fairness, which require integrity of the process, which require accessibility, and I have already expressed my concerns around those and our ability to deal with those.
So, is there a plan, or is there a plan being developed around some of these things as to what each of these scenarios would look like for people to know, for candidates to know?
We're working through our plans as best we can.
Thank you. I know you're doing what you are, more than what you need to be in this, but I also asking this question to get clarification for public to see what kind of confusions are there. So if somebody who is in a ward that is only half of their current ward and 47 model, they would be putting up signs in twice their area with numbers that are not going to be different if a legislation passes.
Councillor, I go back to the principles of the legislation and I express again my concern for being able to carry those out.
Can she simply make a declaration?
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to the clerk. And I was wondering about you mentioned you've sought out independent counsel for legal advice in terms of the ability to hold a fair and democratic election. I remember when we were asking questions originally and you had mentioned this, and given the list that you provided to council, which seemed it would seem almost insurmountable for you to move forward and implement all of that. And now with it going back and it going back and forth, I'm wondering, what is your feeling on that, or what is the advice that you're seeking out from council, if you're able to say that?
I'm not sure that I heard all of the question. There was some noise in the background, but I mean, we have hit a tipping point, and both scenarios are becoming virtually impossible for us to carry out.
Okay, and then so I remember we were discussing that during the first time that we were in the chamber discussing this issue, and you had mentioned that if you found it impossible to deliver a fair and democratic election, then what could you do?
Well, that's a question that I will be asking of the council that I have retained. I have not yet met with them, but I will be doing so later today.
Okay, and what would be a possible outcome if you're seeking advice and your feeling is that it would not be a fair and democratic election? Is there the possibility that you would be able to push the election date back, or is this...
That is precisely the question that I will be discussing with my council.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning, favorite colleagues. So we heard about the advance poll, and I just want to talk about the proxy votes that people don't often think about or talk about, but we are very concerned about engaging our youth, everyone, but especially our youth, in the political process, and many of them have gone away to travel or to college or university, and so the proxy votes forms were not available before they went away. So if you could take us through the process of when those forms will be available, because at this point we will have to mail them to our youth. They have to sign them. We have to somehow get them back here, mailed back, possible. I don't know if we can scan them. So if you can just take us through that process.
Council, there is, I believe it is the 17th that we are required to issue proxies as well. This is getting to be very concerning to us because people no longer have candidate lists that are entirely reliable under whatever the circumstance of the day is. And we have equal concerns about that. That is why we had initially received a request from council to hold advance votes over the Thanksgiving weekend, which is no longer possible.
So that's a problem. And then for students who, for example, my daughter's at the University of British Columbia. She's not coming home for Thanksgiving. And many students are not coming back for Thanksgiving, so that wouldn't have even helped them. But so are we still able to send out the proxy forms September 17th? We're not.
That is, again, something we are addressing in the contingency plan, the latest contingency plan, which staff are working on.
Can you explain other difficulties you may be having with this whole process? I know Canada Post there's an impending strike.
Well, we thought we had that fixed, but we don't. And yes, there is the potential for a Canada Post strike, which will further create issues with voter identification cards and when those might reach people.
And are there any other difficulties? I think you were mentioning paper. Is that still? Are there any other difficulties in addition to the ones you've listed already?
She's asking about paper. I think we're getting into way too much.
Okay. Again, Councillor, we're addressing that in our contingency plan, and we'll deal with that as the need arises.
And how many times a day are you doing yoga?
Once.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. With respect to Bill 31, I have it in front of me. In the subsections, it makes reference many times to the fact that the amendments of this Act made by Schedule 3, Schedule 2 of the Efficient Local Government Act apply despite the Human Rights Code. Can you unpack that sentence for me? This is a question to our city solicitor. And I guess more specifically, is this bill, Bill 31, supposed to override the Human Rights Code? Is that what this means?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, it is. The answer is yes.
Okay, so in every section of Bill 31, it specifically outlines that this bill should override the Human Rights Code. And with respect to the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, because you know I'm the chair of the the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, our committee was consulted quite broadly, as well as the advocates of those who advocate for accessible voting, accessible election planning. A lot of work was done leading up to this election, and the clerks may want to pay attention to this question as well. There was supposed to be a 9-day period around the voting accommodations for people living with requiring accommodations for voting. How is that 9-day period now affected for that community? Because we've now shrunk the advance voting period. We may even get rid of it altogether. Do we even have time to accommodate those 9 days that was outlined in the Municipal Elections Act?
Through the Speaker, as the clerk said earlier, we have had to reduce our advance vote dates given the circumstances we're finding ourselves in. So originally we had planned on doing 9 days of advance vote, and we've now reduced it to 5 days of advance vote. The clerk actually has discretion on how many advance dates she sets and the times and locations. The clerk is very committed to accessibility in elections, and that's been one of the key activities that we've put a lot of effort into. We still feel confident in a 5-day advance vote period that we're still meeting our accessibility requirements. We are piloting a home visit program for the first time in Toronto this election. That was also supposed to be for 9 days pursuant to the advance vote schedule, and it will be reduced to 5 days. However, we have had the ability to double up our schedule and feel confident we could still conceivably serve the same number of electors in that reduced time period.
So there's confidence that that the voters who were supposed to be served under the 9-day program for home voting, those who are living with who require accommodations and who are living with disabilities, but is there the same level of confidence of delivering the fair and free elections for voters who are not requiring the home visiting program?
As the clerk said earlier, I think that, we are reaching a tipping point in our election planning, and the uncertainty is becoming increasingly difficult, and we are continuing to examine every contingency plan we have available to us in order to fulfill our statutory mandate.
Thank you. And I guess my final question is back to the City Solicitor. With respect to Bill 31, infringing on human rights, and that it should override the Human Rights Code, how is it possible that this bill be able to override the Human Rights Code? How legal is that?
This bill is a piece of provincial legislation. The Human Rights Code is also a piece of provincial legislation. So through this bill, it is possible for the province to create a provision trumping something in the Human Rights Code. So it's a little different than the Human Rights Code is a little different than the Constitution that way. Yeah,
thank you. It just jogs one more question, which means that any other subsequent provincial bill that this government puts forward, they could put that same provised language in there, that any additional new legislation can just override the Human Rights Code. Is that correct?
It's certainly within the realm of possibility. We would have to look at any new legislation that came in to determine whether it was legal. However, and I'm always reluctant to comment on a hypothetical. But yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Holyday.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Speaker. Through you to the clerk. Obviously, councillors are getting a lot of questions about...
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Holyday. I skipped. I'm sorry. Pardon? Oh, okay, sorry. I skipped Councillor Kirchiana. Sorry. I'll start your time over. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Holyday.
Want me to go ahead? Yeah. Through you to the clerk. I just wanted to get some clarity. Madam Clerk, you had mentioned before that you have voter cards prepared. So can citizens still expect to get a voter card? I just want to get this to some really clear messages, because I think there's a lot of questions out there from citizens, never mind what councillors have about what's going on.
Through the Speaker, one of our contingency plans, Councillor, given the uncertainty in the election, is we have moved forward to produce, print, and distribute 2 sets of voter information cards under both a 47 and 25 ward scenario. We have not yet posted those. Our plan was to hope for some certainty in the coming days so that we knew which voter information card we should be distributing to the public. We continue to monitor and will pull the trigger accordingly once we have some certainty. But
So
we have plans in place for both scenarios.
So either way, citizens get a voter card, it directs them to go to some voting place. I think I heard the clerk say that they were generally going to be similar voting places, but citizens will follow what the card says just like it was in last election. So that really hasn't changed. Is it fair to say that depending on how Bill 531, court challenges, stays, play out, the contents of the ballot will be different when they get to the voting place? I mean, that's really what the effect is on the voter. The ballot, the list on the ballot will be different.
Through the Speaker, certainly under a 47 ward scenario, we have 1 set of certified candidates, and conceptually we will have a different certified list likely under 25. So the difference on the ballot, yes, absolutely.
Are there any groups of people, so people that registered under 47 and registered under 25, registered under 47 but not under 25, or registered under 25, are any of those categories prohibited from campaigning at this point in time?
Through the Speaker, we have been receiving that question from a number of candidates, members of the public, and the media, and our answer at this stage is we are administering the election under a 47 ward model pursuant to the Superior Court decision, and the MEA requires that only certified candidates technically should be campaigning at this point in time, particularly if they're raising and spending money.
Right, okay. And so for anyone that is out campaigning, I now understand that it's the 47 ward model. Is there anything that prohibits them from campaigning in another area?
Through the Speaker, there is nothing in the Municipal Elections Act that prohibits the candidate from campaigning in another area than the area that they're running in.
Okay, so candidates are still out there able to provide information to people. They can figure out if they want to hedge their bets as to what the final composition will be. So voters are still getting information.
Through the Speaker, I understand that voters are still receiving information, and in fact, when I got home very late last night, I had 3 different pamphlets in my own mailbox, and I think that they were very neutralized in terms of which ward they were running in.
Great. And so what I'm really trying to get at is what are the risks out there for voters to be cognizant of? I still hear that they're still getting a voter card, they're still going to go to a place to vote. Candidates will continue to knock on their door. It is possible that some of those candidates may not be on the final ballot because of the outcomes of these cases. Is there anything else that they need to be cognizant of with the changing dynamics? I get it's very dynamic for the city and for the candidates, but I'm very concerned about the citizens of the city.
At this point, Madam Speaker, voters don't even know which ward they live in.
Why would they care other than to understand who the candidates are if it's just a number?
It's not just a number in one scenario. And I think voters will care because there really is no certainty for them at this stage.
What are the, if I may through you, Madam Speaker, if I could just explain a little bit better what the uncertainties are, because I think that's the heart of my question. What are the things that are uncertain that voters should be paying attention to over the next few days if they are continuing to receive information and they will get a voter's card which tells them one way or another where to go and vote?
That was your last question.
Thank you.
The uncertainty that's out there is people don't know which ward they're in. They are following this debate and getting different issues raised every single day about who's running, where they're running, where they are, where they vote. We're getting those phone calls, and frankly, it's the uncertainty is making this very difficult.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the clerk, I do not envy your position, ladies. Question is as follows. If we are in a scenario that we're in today, which is in flux, and September the 27th rolls around and signs go up, right now, there's no place that we can, there's no restrictions as to where we can campaign, distribute literature. Would there be restrictions on signs and where signs are placed?
Councillor, that is really a question for the sign bylaw people. We're not sure that we have that answer.
Okay. Madam Chair.
First, Councillor Fletcher, please.
Madam Chair, number one, would you be able to put my time on hold, and can we
Yes.
call in the sign law by people? Because, if we're going to be placing signs in another area outside where we're running, what is the result of that? So can you please put my time on hold, and maybe we can contact the sign bylaw people to come in?
Okay, we'll get somebody down here. So, okay, so you've had a minute. Okay. Yes, yes. Councillor Shiner.
So, of the clerk, Madam Clerk, it's kind of following even on that last question, but if you are not, can I please have a moment, people? If you are not a registered candidate under the 47, which I understand is where you would have to have registered now to be a candidate, can you raise any money? Can you spend any money? Can you campaign? Or can you do nothing until legislation comes in to permit the new ward boundaries?
The scenario that we are and candidates are currently working under is 47.
So
those are the rules that apply.
So if you are not registered, you cannot campaign, you cannot have a campaign office, you cannot spend money, you cannot put out brochures.
I'm sorry, Councillor. Madam Speaker, I missed that question.
So, Madam Speaker, sorry,
I'm sorry, Councillor
I
Shiner.
know you were interrupted and the clerk was interrupted. And
Yes, sorry.
my time was running when I wasn't able to get a question, so if you could hold it for 30 seconds or something, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
So, Madam Clerk, I'm trying to get clarification. If you're not registered in the 47 wards election, which is all that we have right now, am I correct? You cannot spend money, you cannot put out a brochure, you cannot put out a note on a door, you cannot canvass, you can't have a campaign office, you can't have a telephone because you're not a candidate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you won't become a candidate until new legislation passes in the House in Queen's Park. Is that correct? And you register?
Well, or a stay is granted.
Okay, but otherwise, you're not a candidate. So those of us that haven't registered within the 47 wards and didn't do it can't do anything now but sit at home. Am I correct? Or do the job at City Council.
That's correct.
So the act, if you have registered then in the 47, you can continue to work under those, spend money, raise money, all that based on the limits that were in place at that time?
Yes.
Okay. I guess the other question then is this is a very, confusing situation. What could the provincial government do so you don't have a nervous breakdown? And I don't mean it that way, but what could the provincial government do? I apologize for that. But I know how frustrated you are. What could the provincial government do to help alleviate the current situation and make it get better?
Councillor, I'm not sure that I can answer that question. I mean, the fact of the matter is we are in court on a stay application, as well as in the process of passing new legislation.
So if the,
So I have several uncertainties
so
to
if the-
deal with.
If the provincial government just passed the legislation, even if you were challenging what they've done, that would then permit the 25 wards to go forward, candidates to go forward, registration to continue, you to send out cards and work that way. Am I correct? It would alleviate the situation?
Well,
I think it depends on the date.
I mean, I think that depends on what date that occurs on. As we've both said now, we are at a tipping point.
So I'm saying if the faster it's passed at Queen's Park, the better it is for the candidates, the better it is for the public to know what the ward boundaries are.
The
And we still need regs.
Yeah, the faster we get certainty is the way I'd answer that question, the better off we will be. I mean, the other issue is that the legislation is one thing, but we still need regulations to allow us to carry out process
When do you get
under the
regulations?
legislation.
When do you get the regulations?
After it's enacted.
After the act is passed
So then
and
Mike-
given royal assent.
So in other words, if they were able to pass, have second and third reading and get that done this week, it would be the best situation? For you?
Certainty in one way, shape, or form is the best situation,
Would
yes.
that provide some certainty?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion?
Thank you. I guess a question of either of you. Have we reached the point where it would be in the public interest to request a postponement of the election?
I can't answer that question, Councillor. I need to seek legal advice, and I have done so.
Have done so or have not done so?
Okay, but I understand that I perhaps Fiona can answer. I don't know. It just, if we thought that was in the public interest, presumably we would say something to that effect. So I guess I'll try to get you out of that box, Uli, and not ask you perhaps Fiona could answer.
Through the speaker, as the clerk and I have said earlier, we are definitely reaching a tipping point. I think that every day matters right now in our election planning. We are less than 5 weeks out from Election Day. We are seeking third-party independent legal counsel, and in terms of what our next steps are in the public interest, I don't think we're at a point where we can comment on that, Councillor.
So then my next question would be, if you reach that conclusion, do you need anything from council, or do you have the authority to make that declaration?
No, this is not a matter for council, Madam Speaker. This is another one of the issues that I will be addressing with my council.
Thank you, and I don't envy you, and thank you, and it's terrible that you've been put through this ordeal.
Cute. Councillor Doucette?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I actually have a question from one of my residents. Holly is watching this procedure. First, she wants to know what ward she'll end up in, but I will deal with that one. She would like to know that will there be a report coming to this council, an audited report coming to this council, which will detail the additional expenses the city is incurring with this debacle, with the duplication, with having to be running 2 elections at the same time. So will there be a report coming back to this council saying how much this election has cost us beyond what we knew we had put into our budget?
Yeah, it'll be the form of a lawsuit.
The MEA actually contains a provision, Council, that states that when I certify the election costs, Council is required to pay those costs.
Sorry, that's not my question. I know we have to pay them, and I know we have to probably take from reserve funds to pay them. Will a report come to this council chamber or to one of our standing committees saying the audit of how much this has cost the city to run this election?
In the report that will come out after the election, we will address the issue of costs, yes, as we always have.
And that will become a public document for everyone to see rather than just those still sitting in this chamber?
Sorry, guys, I can't hear.
Sorry, I'll repeat. Will that become public document so those who aren't sitting in this chamber will also get to see what it has cost this city?
Sorry, reports to council on the election will be public.
Will be public. Thank you very much. And thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Okay, well, I believe that we have staff here now for Councillor Karygiannis. Okay, Councillor Karygiannis.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, through you to staff, we were told by the clerk that we can campaign regardless of where we're registered, and if we want to go outside the boundaries of 447, that there's no restrictions. However, my question is, on the 27th, we will be allowed to put up signs. The same question is right now we can campaign outside the 47 scenario. Would we be able to put up signs as if we're running in the 25 ward? And if not, if we're not able to put up signs, what measures will you take in order to prevent that?
Through the chair to the councillor, you will be able to place signs where you choose to, as long as you're meeting the times and locations, meaning the guidelines on that, but you are not restricted by your ward.
So if we're running under a 25 scenario, I take over a certain boundary that I don't have right now. So regardless of 47 or 25 and no clarity provided until then, I can still go ahead and put up signs in that particular area that it's not under my 47, correct?
That would be my understanding. Again, this is new and a unique issue. I don't have precedence on this, but my understanding would be that you could.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Through you, Madam Chair, to the clerk, for other question, I want to thank the staff from MLS for addressing that issue. If we're running under a scenario 25, we're able to spend extra amount of money. If at the end of the day we were running under 47, but we spend that extra money, are we still restricted under the 47, or are we?
Yeah, we are not certain that we have an answer for that question at this point, Councillor, but we are pursuing those answers. I can't give them to you right now.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
I think that these, if they're private questions, stop me right away. Just to be clear, the government is going to court for a stay expected on what date? Is that date set?
That's scheduled to be argued on Tuesday.
That's the, what day is that? That's the 18th?
18th. No.
17th?
The 18th.
Tuesday, the 18th of September would be the stay. And who would be party to that stay?
Anyone who was party to the original proceeding could participate in the stay application.
So it's the same people that were in front of the judge who rendered the recent decision would be in front of another judge discussing a stay.
Yes.
Yourselves, there are two other law firms, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, etc. there. Okay. And if that was granted, then what would happen? Bill 5 would be in effect at that point?
Yes, a stay effectively puts a decision on hold. The decision says that the election shall proceed on the basis of a 47-ward model. That would be put on hold, and we would revert back to the Bill 5 regime until the appeal had run its course and been decided.
So I think I just need to understand that legal process a little better. That it would be put on hold, the Judge Belobaba's decision will be put on hold, and therefore the process that we were in at the time of that decision of the 25 wards would be the current election.
If the stay is granted, yes, and a stay is always pending the outcome of the appeal. So it's a very temporary measure. Without a stay, the decision's in force even while it's being appealed. But with a stay, it's on hold. It's not in force.
The decision's on
pending
hold.
the completion of the appeal process.
And the appeal process would take how long, in your opinion?
That's out of our control. We're really not certain how long it will take.
So the uncertainty of that, and I don't want you to put words in the clerk's mouth, but that is part of the uncertainty of this election, because we don't know what would happen on the 18th. If there is a stay, then we have an uncertainty about the 47. Bill 5 might be in effect, but could get overturned on the appeal. So nothing is really settled at this point, except for the introduction of Bill 31. Would I be right to say that?
And with the decision having been rendered today, it is in force, and the election is being administered on a 47-ward model.
Correct.
But there are a number of uncertainties because of the appeal, the stay application, and the introduction of Bill 31. There are a number of uncertainties and pieces of the puzzle that have yet to be determined moving forward, yes.
And earlier, I think the clerk had mentioned there's some 200 people that were understanding that the Bill 5 nomination date is September the 14th, which is tomorrow. But with the suspension of Bill 5, there's 5 nomination days that were now removed from the public. Would I be right to put it like
I'm going to
that?
let the clerk speak to the definition of that group of 200. I'm not certain whether they're people who have attempted to register or whether they're just people who registered under the 47-ward regime who have not registered under 25, and perhaps we don't know whether they all want to register. I'm going to let the clerk answer that.
She's going to let the clerk answer, but clerk, you sent a message out on Tuesday saying you're not taking registrations. So would there be any use in attempting to register?
Through the speaker, the clerk is not able to accept nominations at this time under the 25-ward model because technically the 25-ward model does not exist. We are administering the election under a 47-ward model pursuant to the Superior
And
Court
I'm just
decision.
going to ask legal, if any of those 200 people attempted to register, can they still attempt to register and be turned down? Because you're saying you have no idea if they want to. But if they show their interest in that and are turned back because of this uncertainty, would they have a right to attempt?
Certainly anyone can attempt anything.
Okay.
However, I just want to be very clear here that we would be giving advice to
I
the clerk
understand.
as to how to interpret
But
the
I'm talking
legislation.
about the attempt, because you indicated that no one knows who's interested without an attempt. So that's very clear to me now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the clerk. So I just want to pick up on one of the comments that I thought I heard earlier with respect to voting cards being sent out. And you indicated that we have 2 sets available to be sent out. And when is the anticipated sending out date?
Through the speaker, we are in the process of finalizing the voter information cards under both a 47-ward scenario and a 25-ward scenario. We have not yet determined our induction date through Canada Post for mail-out, as we're waiting to see if some certainty can come in the next few days. But our plan is certainly to induct by likely mid-next week.
Okay, so the certainty that I think people, well, there are 2 parts of the certainty. The locations have really actually already been established, and what I thought I heard the clerk say was that regardless of whether it's a 47 or 25, the locations are basically the same. So the voter ID cards going out would establish the locations, and there shouldn't be all that much difference. Is that correct?
Through the speaker, we have been able to confirm voting places for Election Day that are fairly similar under a 25 and a 47 ward model with some minor adjustments. The challenge becomes the advance vote locations, which we include on our voter information cards so that the eligible electors are aware of the dates and locations they can utilize an advance vote option.
Okay, so let me then focus on the advance poll dates, because at the end of the day, if we run on the assumption that there will be an election on October 22nd, regardless of what transpires over the next number of weeks, what really is important is what appears on the ballot. That's the uncertainty. The names that appear on the ballot, whether on election day or on the advance poll day. What happens if we aren't able to establish what the actual ballots look like by the advance polling date? Can we do away with advance polling and just rely on an actual election? I'm just asking a question. I'm told that an election has to occur on October 22nd. That's all I know.
Madam Speaker, I believe I've already addressed parts of that question. No, it is not sufficient in order to meet the principles of the legislation to simply have ballots at various locations on election day. People need to know where to go vote. They need to know who their candidates are. I have principles that I must comply with.
And we need to provide some level of advance
And
vote
we
option.
absolutely need to provide some level of advance vote. It's simply not possible. We have a number of requirements for ballot printing. It takes a large amount of time to print those ballots.
So my last question then is simply this. If we are approaching a tipping point, what is the tipping point date? No, because
July 27th.
Through the Speaker, we can't give you an actual tipping point date. We are continuing to work through various time scenarios. Things are changing, as you can appreciate, day by day, and we are pushing out our vendors and processes as much as possible to see what scenarios may be still available to us.
But there comes a point where you can't push out any further, and that's the date I'm looking for.
That means they're paying a premium for everything they do.
Madam Speaker, I can't answer that question. It depends on various scenarios. And we don't know what those are.
Like increased costs.
Ask them if they're paying a premium.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Perruzza, the question's been asked to staff, not to you.
No, but he went.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. I believe this is to the clerk. On what date does the oath of office of the existing council expire?
Midnight, November 30th.
Okay. And I know that you have yet to receive legal advice, but in the event that an election is unable to be conducted prior to that date, what happens?
I think that's a legal question, Councillor, and I believe that has already been answered.
Madam Speaker, could I have the question repeated, please?
The clerk has just told us that the oath of office of the existing council expires midnight November 30th. My question was, how is the City of Toronto governed in the event that we are unable to conduct an election prior to that date?
There is a provision in the legislation that would allow the province to step in. I'm not really prepared to say more than that, given that it's a hypothetical scenario, and I would hope a very unlikely one.
I respectfully, by stepping in, there's nothing in law about how they step in. They could, for example, appoint Paul Christie or Michael Ford or some other person to run the City of Toronto in the interim.
The province would be entitled to appoint individuals to govern, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Perks. We have one more speaker on the list. Last to ask questions of staff. Councillor Perruzza, just give me a second to find your name.
Yes,
Thank you,
I
and
just
you've got-
want to recap very, very quickly. So, under the 25 ward scenario, the lists that you are using are the provincial lists?
You're talking the voters list, Councillor?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So, it's okay. So, under the 25 ward scenario, the voting places would be the voting places that the provincial, that the province used in the
No.
last election?
No.
The province has a very different electoral administrative system they use, Councillor. They are decentralized across Ontario with a different staffing model. So we certainly leverage the poll stations that they used in June, but they're not all the same.
Would they be like 80% the same, 90% the same, 70% the same?
Through the Speaker, I think generally our poll lists are fairly comparable between the province of Ontario and the City of Toronto because there's only so many libraries, community centres, schools and churches that one has available to avail themselves as a poll station, but they're not exactly the same.
Okay, so in terms of, so the vote counting machines, that leads to another question. Are they our machines or the provincial machines?
The vote tabulators that Toronto Election uses are our machines that we purchased 18 years ago.
And they are completely adaptable to either scenario very, very quickly.
We, as part of our contingency planning between a 47 and 25 ward scenario, we have put contingency plans in place to enable our tabulators to affect both of those scenarios in a fairly flexible manner.
I heard you say that you are going to be holding an advance vote or not going to be holding an advance vote?
Madam Speaker, I believe I've addressed that question. I have indicated my intention and my desire to hold an advance vote. However, I need certainty and I need it soon, and I can only evaluate whether I will or I won't when I have that.
And, but you did say that it's no longer possible during the Thanksgiving weekend to hold the advance vote.
Through the Speaker, we've already publicly reduced advance vote from 9 days to 5 days. That does not include Thanksgiving weekend any longer.
Okay. Did I hear you say that you have the authority to shift the election date?
That is a question that I will be addressing with my legal counsel. That raises, however, a whole series of difficulties and complexities that would need to be sorted out. So it is not a simple matter.
Okay, so addressing it with your legal counsel, you mean like you go to your legal counsel and you say, can I just, as the city clerk, push the election date back a couple of weeks and you know, everything else be damned? Or is the election date fixed into the legislation?
I am unable to answer that question.
In terms of the regulations, you stipulated that you require some regulations after the new act is passed in order for you to do what exactly?
Through the Speaker, when the provincial government enacted Bill 5, they enacted regulations a few days later that provided new dates through regulation that were already passed in the Municipal Elections Act. So we would need a similar regulation enacted under Bill 31 to enable us to implement an election and still meet our statutory processes.
What does that mean exactly?
So, for example, the voters list for candidates due date was 2 weeks ago. So a regulation made under Bill 31 would need to tell us what our new statutory date would be for voters list revision period, proxy applications, et cetera, et cetera.
How many more et ceteras are there? No, just, last question to the sign folks. Office signs on campaign offices, when can they legally go up and
Which is 10 days? No. Time frame. It's my understanding that if there is an existing sign structure on the facility, that they could go up now.
what do you mean by an existing sign structure? I don't understand.
So at a plaza, they typically have signs that may be vacant or have a commercial operation using it at this time. Isn't there a 10-day piece?
This time, or I'm sorry, I'm not clear on that. Could you just be a little clearer, like on what that means? Because we were operating under the impression that they couldn't go up until like the 27th.
Those are election signs.
Thank you, Councillor. That was your last question. I'll let staff answer.
Okay, so election signs that it would be in the window of the office follow the election sign time, the 25 days. The actual sign, the header above the windows can go up now.
What's the difference?
Okay, Councillor Perruzza, thank you very much for your questions.
What's the difference?
One says re-elect.
I see no other.
You can put re-elect Anthony Perruzza on the top, but you can't put it on the bottom?
Yeah, Councillor, that's the end of your questions. Thank you very much. I'll go on to speakers. First on the speakers list is Councillor Mihevc, followed by Councillor Matlow. I'd remind councillors that if you do have motions, please move them when you stand to speak before you actually speak. Thank you, Councillor Mihevc. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do have a motion that I'd like to present, and I'd ask the clerks to put it on the screen. I'll speak to it in a second. But the first thing I want to do is I think on behalf of all of us at City Council and really the citizens, residents of the City of Toronto, is to thank our staff and particularly the legal department and the city clerks. Like someone has thrown a monkey wrench into this system and has caused a real mess. And they're the ones who are spending not a few hours, but many hours every day, 7 days a week, and have been for the last several weeks trying to sort this out. I know that people are stressed. We're all stressed, and they deserve our total support in a lot of things. My motion has three parts to it. The first part, call it the democratic piece. It is to have City Council express its strong keyword, strong opposition to Bill 31 and the use of Section 33 of the Constitution in this matter. There's been a lot of discussion on this. I don't want to go over it all, but to use that stick of the Charter, the notwithstanding clause, to override the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and for the Premier to say that he is willing to do that again and again and again if his will does not prevail, is an abuse of the legal system, it's an abuse of the judicial system, it's an abuse of the long-standing traditions that have governed this city, this province, and this country. And I think we need to, while the wording is fairly simple, let Torontonians know that we as a people do not accept the way that he has, the way he has callously overrun the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The second motion is to direct the city solicitor to challenge, the second part of the first motion is to challenge the legality of Bill 31 through an application in the courts. Yes, I recognize that it's a long shot. I think we all do. But I think that we need to use and continue to use every power that is available to us in law to fight what the province is doing. We do this as our city's legal department, and I'm thankful to them again for spending countless hours going over precedents and ways that this might be managed. And this motion includes, of course, as the solicitor has said, working with outside solicitors who are being being hired by other candidates who are doing this on a pro bono basis and in the public interest. Of course, it includes them. We need to continue to have that legal fight, and that's what the second motion does. The third motion is the one where we need support from another order of government, and that's the federal government. We know that there is, I didn't know that such a thing existed. It comes from, I understand, the Constitution of 1867, that the federal government has the power to disallowance with respect to Bill 31. They have that power. They have not exercised it since World War II. Is this one of those extraordinary cases where it should be exercised? I think we as a council have an ability and should say, yes, this is one of those times when that power should be exercised. We need residents, we need our good residents to ask MPs from Toronto to watch our back, to have our back, and to say to the federal government, this is an appropriate use of that power. When the provincial government inappropriately uses the notwithstanding clause to overrun our rights and freedoms to conduct an election in a fair and transparent way, then the federal government has not an ability, has an obligation, dare say, to say, province, you've really overstepped this. I have a feeling that, I know that the residents of the City of Toronto will appreciate that. I have a feeling that many, even in his own caucus, would welcome that, and so that this trial can pass away from the ruling party at Queen's Park. Madam Speaker, I think all of us here, whether you've been here one term or many terms, know that we are in extraordinary times. We have never seen anything like this. We need to be extraordinarily vigilant, extraordinarily strong, and extraordinarily, frankly, working in hope that the right thing is done in this situation. So I hope you can support these motions. They are, I think, in the public interest. It's not about us as individuals. It is really about democracy in our city and our need to defend it. Thank you very much.
We do have a question for you, clarification. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Councillor Mihevc. Number one, City expressed a strong opinion to Bill 31 and the use of Section 33 and the Constitution of this matter. Whether we do or we don't, do you think it make any difference up at Queen's Park?
No, frankly, I don't think it will make a difference to the Premier Ford. Let me finish, if I could, use my own words. But I do think it makes a statement to the citizens and residents of the City of Toronto. This is about us speaking to them, saying, we are on record. I hope the TDSB does that, the TCDSB does that, all civic institutions also do something similar.
Number three, City Council requests the federal government to exercise the power of disallowance with respect to Bill 31 to preserve respect for fundamental rights and freedoms provided in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So what we're asking is another institution of governments in order to sit on this, on the provincial government, say you can't do this in order to preserve the jobs of a couple of city councillors in the City of Toronto. Is this what you're asking for?
No, I'm asking the federal government, who has the power. This is the final, excuse the language, trump card that we have in the governmental system. Madam Speaker, could I answer?
Councillor, give Councillor Mihevc an opportunity to answer, please.
Let's use the proper language here. Let's not use synonyms. To intervene, that's what you're asking for. Correct?
Madam Speaker,
can Councillor Mihevc please answer it, Councillor?
I believe in this extraordinary moment that we have not seen in the history of municipal, provincial relations in our history, that it is appropriate for the federal government to exercise its power. It has this power to intervene. It has this power to put aside this provincial onslaught on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I think they have an obligation to act in this regard.
Councillor, through the chair to you, do you think that the federal government, I mean, they already stated that they won't. Why are we having this motion in front of us? I mean,
well, we have never asked formally. There may have been some individual conversations, but we have not formally asked as council. And we are the democratically elected voice of the City of Toronto. I think the federal government, if they get a motion from us asking in a, can I finish? Asking in a very serious way for them to defend our local civic democracy,
And
that they
isn't
will
the
have an
provincial
obligation.
government
Can I
the
finish?
rightfully-
Can I finish?
Counselor,
That they
The
will-
please.
rightfully elected body,
Counselor.
aren't they?
that
Counselor.
they will respond to the democratic will as expressed in our council. That's what we need to do.
Are you trying to tell me that the provincial government is not duly elected and they don't have the
No
right to do this?
applause, no applause, please.
Is this what you're telling me? We're rightfully elected and they're not. They were just placed there by magic wand. Is this what you're
Okay,
saying?
thank
I'm
you.
saying
Ca-
that
Okay,
we are
Counselor,
We're all democratically elected.
Counselor
But
Mihevik.
we're also subject to the Charter
Coun-
of Rights and Freedoms. And that's
Counselor Mihevik, Counselor Mihevik, you answer the question. Counselor Karygiannis, please. Counselor Fletcher. Yes.
You all get walked out today.
Yeah, we have-
I'm just wondering, Councillor Mihevik, I have just some questions for you. Some councillors seem to think you're moving this motion. I think the quote is, doing this to preserve your job or to preserve councillors' jobs. And I would just like you to comment on that.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Counselor Campbell, I'd appreciate if you stop interrupting. Okay, Counselor Campbell. Okay, Counselor Fletcher. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Counselor Fletcher.
Thank you. I just
go
wondered
ahead.
if you'd like to comment on that, because you have said that City Council expressed its strong opposition to Bill 31 and the use of the Section 33 of the Constitution in this matter. Is this from a democratic rights point of view or a preserve my job point of view?
Counselor Karygiannis,
Would you
please.
escort? I watched that, very effective yesterday when the clerks were.
Well, I know. I wish we can do that here
You
too.
certainly can, Speaker.
Yeah.
You have a lot of power if you'd like to use it.
Yeah. Where's the security? We have to start
Right
getting
beside you,
security.
there is-
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Counselor
To
Fletcher.
answer that question,
Counselor Karygiannis, please. Counselor Karygiannis, if you continue, I'm going to ask you to leave. Please. Stop interrupting.
Order, will you exercise that same thing to others?
Yes, I will.
Good, then if you don't, then I will point them out to you
Okay,
when they speak.
Thank you. And so stop interrupting. Okay, Counselor Fletcher, continue.
Well, I'm not sure that, I don't know if my time was running through all of that.
No, I stopped your time.
Okay, so just, would you like me to repeat the question, or you've got the question?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it is a good question. I think all of us around here recognize that there is an element because we are the ones who will be the beneficiaries of one system or another system or both systems or neither system. And, you know, it's important to acknowledge that and put that in a box. However, I think most of us in this process have gone to our publics and have sought out the wisdom of the broader community. So when I do that, and when I listen to the wise owls like former Premier Bill Davis, former Premier Bob Rae, the former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, and frankly, people in our community, they are appalled by this. They are appalled by the poor way in which this particular premier is assaulting their democratic rights. You know, we come and we go. But in the next little while, this is something that is going to stay with us for generation after generation, that a government can, at its will, impose and override the charter for something like number of seats on a city council. Like if we let that precedent go forward, then it's not about our self-interest, it's about our common interest in defending and preserving democracy at the civic level. That's what this is really about.
Thank you. Councillor Mihevik, the Bill 31 is called the Efficient Local Government Act. Did you find it efficient when the legislature has a standing vote and a standing vote count rather than an electronic vote count as our very efficient local
Okay,
government
Councillor
has?
Fletcher, that was your last question.
Do I have a chance to respond?
Yeah, Councillor Mihevik?
I think I did experience, many of us experienced inefficiency and chaos at council. That was 2010 to 2014. I think this last term of council, we have had very animated conversations, and I think it's not good to say animated conversations and debates equal inefficiency. We have had some tough decisions here. We've struggled through them. We've made them happen. And we have moved this city forward in the last 4 years. I'm proud of that. I think most of us are proud of the work that we have done here on City Council. Just because there's an intense debate, that doesn't mean we're not advancing the city forward. So I don't think we're inefficient. In fact, I think we are one of the most efficient orders of government, given the volume and diversity of the kinds of issues that we deal with at this council.
Thank you. Yeah, hold on. Point of order, Councilor DiCiano.
In fact, Madam Speaker, I'm not even sure if it's a point of order, but I'm just asking for lunch if this council would like to maybe vote on just making it an hour, because we all got to get back to our communities and not waiting till 2 o'clock.
Well, pardon? Yes. So there is a motion on the floor for lunch to be an hour rather than an hour and a half, recorded vote. Yes. We need 2/3.
Councillor Perruzza, please.
Councillor Grimes, please.
Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please.
The motion to vary the order paper carries. The vote is 20 to 10.
Okay, we're recessed to 1:30.